morning glory. Say there, stop that yawning. A brand new day is dawning. Pull up the shade and let the sun come through. Good morning glory. Spend about an hour underneath the shower and keep on singing like the birdies do.
You asked for it and we delivered. Actually, you never asked for it. We just delivered. It's Books of the Week on CPL Radio, a library radio station. Those two words together sound funny, and they are. I'm Jeff Messerman in Cedarburg, Wisconsin, and those two words sound funny too. Over in Boston, over yonder, over there, is Steve Donahue, and he's a book critic. Hi.
Good morning, everybody. And good morning to Wisconsin, the ground zero of American serial killers.
We started it. It's one of our chief exports. So, very proud, yes. Well, what is this show? What is this show? You want to grab us and shake us? What are you doing? What are you boys doing? Well, I'll tell you. It's something like this. If you've ever seen a show like this.
Oh, my God. That's rather eerily accurate, isn't it?
I feel a little exposed around Captain Kangaroo here. Anyway, we cover books, and we like to, usually we'll take a trip through the nonfiction section over to the fiction section, and then a wild card. Today is going to be, I guess, essentially a massive wild card, but a wild card of a higher class, Stephen.
Yes. Today is also a bit of a reputation-saving episode. Since in our last episode, I recognized virtually nothing that we talked about. The one book that I knew about definitively is not a book and doesn't have an author and doesn't have a purpose and doesn't seem to exist at all.
Oh, my. Well, yes.
In order to reassure our viewers that you have any reason to be talking to me at all, I thought we'd go through some books that I have a likelihood of knowing.
We'll see about that.
Although in that Captain Kangaroo visual, all I could hear was Grandma Messerman saying, "You call that a limbic system?"
Well, yes.
I told you to bundle up. Let your large intestine be larger. Your brother's large intestine is larger.
I did the best I could, Grandma. Well, here we are. Yes, we have no tomatoes. So there's Grandma Messerman on the back porch. It's that time of year, too. I bet all your tomatoes are doing well. Let's check out the
archival photos that you show. It goes a little bit further to explaining the whole serial killer thing.
if your tomato crop doesn't do well, yes, you have to turn on your neighbor. That's just how it is around here. So we're gonna do all classics now. Before we jump into this frighteningly leaning Tower of Pisa pile I have here on my desk, that is something I learned about classics this morning as I was rounding them up. Just by weight, if you're trying to check out books here at the library by weight, classics are a really good way to go. I discovered little bursitis after that this morning. Can we discuss maybe for 60 seconds or less, a classic? Is that a loaded term? Is it eye of the beholder? What would you say to that, Steve?
Well, ideally, I would say, when in answer to the question, what is a classic? It's what Steve effing says it is. But apparently the world wants more than that. The world outside of Wisconsin wants more than that.
Just a hair.
And of course, I resist the bullying of 12 blue-haired psychos on Twitter who say you can't have classics without classism. A classic is a work of literature that has stood the test of time. I think that's the easiest thing to say.
Sure.
So you can have forgotten classics, a work that stood the test of time for a long time but not forever.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can have classics that are obviously immortal, that are obviously going to live forever. So 100 years ago, the fringes of any list of classics would look different than they do today.
Right.
But the heart and soul of it would not look any different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It makes me curious to know about how this whole category does at the library.
It's weird, which I guess stands to reason, in that one of two ways these books are going to move. We're going to do shelf reading and adjust. No, I'm kidding. One of two ways are going to move. Essentially, someone accidentally stumbles on and goes, interesting. Or someone comes in and says, I feel like, and this is what makes me a little alarmed about the term classics, I feel like I should be reading more classics, which I don't know. And I try to dissuade them from that impulse because it sounds to me like that's guilt reading. And I'm not sure that's such a good thing.
Right. Let's all be on the same page here. When it comes to free time reading, there is no should. There is no should. Just get rid of that completely. There is no should. There is only want.
English Teachers of America did set us up for that kind of failure, didn't they? They just said, you should be reading this or you'll get an F.
Right, which is why I specify free time reading. Because if you're mandated to read in school, well, then there is a should and there's a grade running on it. But on your own time, on the limited time that you get to read, there's no should at all. The immortal classics, the ones that have stuck around for hundreds or even thousands of years, they don't need any help from guilt.
Right.
Give them a fair chance. Most of them will be in translation. But if you give them a fair chance, you do your amount of learning to get on their level, they'll entertain you plenty on their own. That's what I always tell people. I always tell people, if you want to know why the Iliad has been a classic for 2,000 years, read it.
Yeah.
Don't read about it. Don't listen to a professor. Read it, and you'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that out of the way, so
I'm interested to know how these things do at the library. Once upon a time, these things, since they are taught in schools, the library would be the absolute backstop of students. But all these things are available free online.
Right. They will move also because, and you're right, if you Gutenberg or however you want to find them online, that's great. But you do get that crowd, and I have respect for that crowd who says, I need the tangible book. I like that smell. Right. These smell worse than most. Just so you know. But yeah, there's a lot of that. And sometimes people just feel good carrying a classic around. I don't know if I did this morning because I had so many, but that's okay. Well, let's get started on this pile before it topples and we have an amazing sound effect of a radio studio shuddering. So we're starting with an obvious classic. It's kind of like, I had to start with Stella Maris. I'm kidding. Joke. It's a joke. It's a total joke, Steve. I'm so sorry. I was saving that one.
Now would be time for a finger wagging emoji.
There we go. 50-cent joke right there.
For viewers who might not be up on the lore, not like Cormac McCarthy at all. He is an obvious fraud. He is not a sometime classic. He's not an immortal classic. He's an obvious literary fraud. In 50 years, your grandkids aren't going to know what a book is, and they're going to be drugged out of their minds 24 hours a day, so they're not going to make fun of you as good.
So lucky.
I know. Can't we live in their paradise?
I mean, jeez. I worked hard so they could live the optimum life. Let's move on to something actual here. These are going to be some weird ones, Steve. These are books that were on our shelves. The authors are usually filed as potentially classic, but I grabbed their off-brand, shall we say, and this is pretty exciting to me. This is Thomas Mann's Joseph and His Brothers, the complete works. Look at this old baby. It's on our shelves. A publication on this one has got to be probably late 50s, I'm thinking, just this particular collection.
You cannot possibly tell me that gets checked out. You cannot possibly tell me that.
It doesn't. Actually, that's not true. No. Excuse me. Last year, it did circ last year to another library. We had to put it on a van, and it drove away, and then Joseph came back in pretty good shape. So yeah, there it is. But this is
Thomas Mann, of course, is the author of Magic Mountain, which is the greatest novel of the 20th century. And the story of Joseph and his brothers will be much more familiar to a lot of patrons as the source material, so to speak, for the musical Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. This is the story of the youngest son of a patriarch's family who develops the ability to read prophetic dreams. And he is the apple of his father's eye, and his older brothers can't stand that. So they throw him down a well and then sell him into slavery. Which,
my brother did the same.
you're from a South Boston Irish Catholic family, you're going to be saying, "Yeah, I wish I'd thought of that." He goes into Egypt, and he becomes, through merit and his ability to read dreams, the Pharaoh's right-hand man. And then a famine sweeps through the land, and his family is destitute, and his brothers have to go to the Pharaoh to beg for relief, and Joseph is right there. And do they recognize him right away, or don't they? Does he feel like he should be vengeful or not? The story is incredible. It's one of the few, I would argue, one of the very few self-contained and genuinely modernly effective dramas in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Which is what we call your Bible.
Thank you. Yes, we were first. We don't get into the sequel too much, Steve.
There are all sorts of stories in the Old Testament, but the story of Joseph and his brothers is a lot like the story of King David. It is genuinely dramatically effective.
Yeah.
You don't have to help it. It has the drama already. And Thomas Mann saw that, and he, in his book, went in, laid out the story of Joseph and his brothers, and then sucked all the drama out of it completely. What you're left with is a petrified brick. Future archaeologists are going to look at that brick. They're going to dust it off with their little feather dusters, and they're going to say, I think millions of years ago, this was once drama. But no drama of it remains, unfortunately. Thomas Mann he is a great author, but he is not one of those authors where you say he could do no wrong.
Well, the problem is that he's so cheerful.
I think that in this instance, I hate to say it, I'm glad the book is in your library, but in this instance, you're going to find it a little bit of a slog, I think.
So, truth be told, I'm kind of using you today, Steve, although you knew that months ago, because I'm wondering if some of these should be weeded, and I feel like maybe I should weed this.
It's only fair, right? I use you.
That is true. It's a mutual using society.
Not only do you have all the tech knowledge to do this podcast, but later this afternoon, you're mowing the lawn.
Yes, it's nice. I got Steve is going to have breakfast with Spock, so all because of me. Well, I think this is going to get. What I do is I get out a thick black Sharpie and I put it through the barcode, and I have a stamp that says withdrawn.
If you're going to have Thomas Mann, if you're going to spend library money on Thomas Mann, then get the best modern translation of Magic Mountain. There's a new collection of short stories. Get that. But Joseph and his brothers, if you have all the shelf space in the world and all the budget in the world, sure, then have it. You should have everything by now. If you don't, then Magic Mountain, Dr. Faustus, Buddenbrooks. But
actually, Buddenbrooks and Dr. Faustus are right before Joseph on my shelf upstairs. So it's a Thomas Mann runway up there. So, but maybe it's time to clear off a few planes off that runway. Moving on to, and some of these are these really cool. We have these great, people turn them in. So it's a lovely, gilded editions and all that. This is Roundup by Ring Lardner. A bunch of short stories. I had a good time with this. I thought these stories were all a delight, but antiquated, yes, but I think that's what we're talking about today. So,
well, not necessarily.
Oh,
because you call that duds doesn't mean. Ring Lardner is part of that whole coterie of guy writers from around the same time period.
Straw Hat, Cigarette,
Thurber and Mencken.
Sure.
Ring Lardner, and the one female member of the club, Edna Ferber, that have never done anything for me.
Oh, really? Oh,
Ring Lardner, I read his stuff and I get the energy, but it's just so much of it is just, look at me, Ma, I'm writing. Won't the egghead swells up in New York think
right. Well, yeah, he's a common man. He's a common man.
Right, but when you think about it, that kind of posturing is incredibly insulting to the common man. It's sure they got books.
Didn't bother me none. And they're very, cigar chomping, journalistic. There's not a lot of fat on these stories, that's for sure. I mean, they just, but
No, I'd be curious. Well, again, I want to know, does this go out at the library? Does anybody care about Ring Lardner?
I was the last one to check it out, and it's been some time. But it's so pretty. So it's got a tail, for heaven's sake. Come on. Yeah, I guess Ring Lardner's biggest claim to fame is having a son who wrote like the screenplay for MASH. I think isn't that kind of how that all works out, the movie? I don't know, but nobody thinks about it anymore. I mean, that's for sure. In fact, on today's show, that this may be, we have the distinction of maybe being the only people on YouTube today to mention Ring Lardner, so I feel pretty good about that.
You never know. Some YouTuber might mention Ring Lardner, but the thing is, you'll be able to picture in your mind with perfect accuracy what that YouTuber will look like.
It won't look like us.
And that shouldn't be true.
Right.
For any kind of book, that shouldn't be true. Although it's true for so many of them. We could bring up Sally Rooney. You know for sure what kind of pasty-faced, vaping, way-faced, tofu chomping.
It's them.
I never want to know what's going on
there. None of our business. Here's one. I find this book a little insufferable myself, but some people seem to like it. This does go out. It's Franny and Zoe from Salinger.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this brings us to more questions about what makes a classic.
Sure.
And one of the obvious things that does is institutional repetition in schools.
Mm-hmm.
If your book is taken up by schools, then you're going to live a lot longer than you would if your book weren't taken up by schools. And that happened to J.D. Salinger big time with Catcher in the Rye.
Catcher in the Rye, yeah.
And it has a subsidiary effect. People like to say that these things are carved in stone, but they're carved in schools.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And if you are a PhD candidate and you're going into education at the college level, and you look back and think, well, what books certainly belong on my syllabus? You're not going to put J.D. Salinger on that syllabus without thinking. And you should think, because he's not all that good.
Yeah.
The reason you're not going to think about it is because you learned about him in your womb.
Right.
Yeah. These stories are...
I don't mind Catcher in the Rye. That one I reread recently, I enjoyed how insufferable the main character is. I actually think that's...
And there's a lot going on there. Yeah. The Salinger also obviously thinks that Holden Caulfield is insufferable. Mm-hmm. You don't get that the first time through.
No.
You're on Holden's side,
right?
At the adult world, and that's not the book. But that's not true for a lot of the short stories. I mean, most people read Franny and Zoe when they're 13 to 15 years old. And the point I want to make about it is that if you go back to it now, go to the Cedarburg Public Library and borrow the book now and read it from front to back, you're going to think that's exactly the age that works here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That Salinger would have been in a towering rage if you told him that, but exactly the age that works. Whereas a lot of people, when they're 15 to 17, will read, for instance, Why I Will Live at the P.O. by Eudora Welty. Mm-hmm. And they'll feel like it really resonates, but you go back to that in your late 30s, you'll see this is an incredibly powerful author.
Yeah,
I am getting so much more out of this now than I did then. Definitely. That won't be true with Franny and Zoe.
I am fearful that much loved director Wes Anderson loves this book.
Yeah, yeah.
For better or worse.
Well, much loved director Wes Anderson, and if you look at his movies, what age group are you thinking?
Yep. Exactly right.
but let's be very careful. We have learned from past experience that when you and I even slightly start talking about movies, they hijack the whole show. So we don't want to get this show confused with Cedarburg Public Library Goes to the Movies, another show that we produce.
Yes, and should again. But to deflect, quick, let's sell some nose warmers. If you give enough, it's a good time to talk about
what?
Patreon. Books of the week. If you give, I promise you, if you go over and above what we're asking, I will find some way to send you a striped wool nose warmer. I have a lot of knitters in this building, and I'll make it happen for you.
And for those of you who might have your minds in the gutter, let's remember that thing you just saw is a nose warmer. Okay?
Look what happened. We started talking about the nose warmer and the sirens went off. Every time we bring it up.
I apologize to our viewers. I am in a different location here. Those sirens are going to happen at regular intervals.
Oh, absolutely.
Ear-piercing, desperately frantic sirens at regular intervals throughout the show. There's nothing I can do about it.
I'm usually waiting at the siren for the door to be kicked down and say, stop podcasting now. We know what you two are up to. Moving on to a cover that I love. I know nothing about this book, but I saw it this morning and said, I've got to talk about this. Neville Shute, Pied Piper. Did I find one?
Earth.
Look at this. This is great. I know nothing about this book.
And his brothers would be explainable because it's second-rate. It's a second-rate book from a great author, an author who wrote an immortal classic.
Sure.
Magic Mountain. Pied Piper is a second-rate book from an author who wrote. Well, he wrote a book that got a lot of extra life. Neville Shute wrote On the Beach, which is a great post-apocalyptic novel.
Yeah,
made into a great movie.
Terrific movie.
But why on earth would you have this book? Why on earth would you?
Well, it's not because of its condition that we're keeping it, that's for sure.
Oh, take out your magic marker and draw. It's taking up shelf space that could go to other things. Does the library have a copy of On the Beach?
We do. Yes, that was on the right next to it. Yep, without a doubt. This is I love this because I think people in the 50s would look at the back of this book and it would say, if you enjoyed this, if you have an extra $1.39, which is what we charge over at patreon.com, by the way, you can also have this very pretty leather-bound thing.
You know, that book is not common. You could de-access that and sell it on eBay and give the money to the Friends of the Library.
I think that is its future, yes, especially after this conversation. So if you want your own copy of Pied Piper, keep tabs on the Friends of the Library book sale, all right? I love that this is published by the Book League of America, sort of, superheroes, book superheroes, the Book League of America.
So is the original publication date of that edition during the war?
Is it wartime? That's a really good question. 1942. I would say that's a resounding yes. So there we are.
In answer to the floating question, I have read it. I've read all of Neville Shute, and it's a rare example where the late gadfly Christopher Hitchens and I both agree. Hitchens used to say that Neville Shute knew a whole bunch of ways to screw up a novel. He's absolutely right about that.
And a black belt.
He's terrible. Actually, On the Beach it's right on the borderline of being terrible. He wasn't a good author. On the Beach is saved by a couple of narrative gimmicks that he does that are straight out of Weird Tales magazine, and also saved by a great movie adaptation.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Pied Piper, there is no reason for any library to have it. Not at all.
No
one borrows that book, right?
The more we talk about this and lambast it, the more likelihood that it's going to go out, Steve. And then I'll have to keep it. That's kind of my rule. If it circs in a year, I keep it for an extra year. So we better clam up on Pied Piper. We're going to be in real trouble over here. So this is a really interesting, very loaded statement at the top. I'm going to see if I can do this without showing the title right away. But look what this says here. So, are you ready to go?
Oh, goodness gracious. To quote Nelson Muntz in The Simpsons, I think of two ways why that title is wrong. He says it about the naked lunch, but
hey, don't piss him off, okay? He's having none of this.
Mom loved this book. A lot of his fans claim to love this book, but what's the matter, baby? Come on, you can do it.
Oh, there we are.
The greatest CPL guest star of all time.
I love it. Frida is here. Frida has buried her face in your pillow. I think the title of her book this morning is My Butt for the World to Kiss.
Of Human Bondage, yeah. Well, I want to know, oh my God. All right. Our show has officially been on stage.
In the nick of time.
There's
Thank
no
you.
competing with that. Take it from me. I've made a million videos with that face over my shoulder.
Oh my goodness.
Competing with that face.
This is going to get the most hits of any of our shows. I love that. Frida, you have a new job. Do that every episode, please.
But again, I want to know, does this thing circulate? No. I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it.
It's been a few years, actually. Let's just say my Sharpie is cocked and ready.
Oh, if I were you doing the classics for the library, find a nice set of Mom's short stories.
We have that.
Okay, yeah, well then don't. Well, I guess Of Human Bondage is his highest profile novel.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd probably keep that before you'd keep Pied Piper. I still can't believe you have that on your shelf.
I feel like I need to make a display after this episode upstairs because we have some display racks. I'll be like, there's the classics from the classic episode that are on the chopping block. So, yes. Well, Mom himself says that this is his clarity of style, the perfection of his form, the subtlety of his thoughts, veiled thinly behind a worldly cynicism, have made him an international figure. But I think Frida's more of an international figure myself, but that's just me. There it is, Of Human Bondage. We'll skip that.
I have to say, I don't want to stray into off-color territory on books.
Well, no, of course not.
Say, if the title were accurate, it would have been a more interesting book.
Oh no! I don't have a picture for that. I'm going through my files. I thought I had something. Darn it! I wish I was ready. Nope, nothing. Okay, that's all right.
The closest that we get, I'm afraid, is that nose warmer.
There are other. The last thing you want to hear in your house is, "Hey, who's been using my nose warmer?"
I know.
Hey, let's move.
You're a woman and you're walking down the street with that thing, and you walk up to anyone in the world and they say, "What the hell is that?" You're going to say, "Oh, this thing, I found it in my husband's dress drawer, and I'm assuming this is what it's for."
February in Wisconsin is very cold for all extremities. I'll have you know. What have we done to the classics episode?
I don't know.
Quick, Stephen Crane, save us.
There we go. Okay. Now here we go. Stephen Crane, of course, has written an immortal classic. He wrote The Red Badge of Courage. And that's not just a product of you being drilled into you in school. It is a brilliant book, a great American book. And a lot of the other stuff that he wrote is great as well. Every library should have a book like this. Maybe not that older one. That copy is from the late 1950s, right?
I would say it. Yeah, it actually was purchased. I love this. They had to get the manual Smith Corona typewriter out and type the date it came in. You can see that there, 1966, August. So
but that volume came out in the late 50s. Didn't it?
More than likely, yeah, it was probably donated in 66 to this library. So let me see if I can find a date here for us. 63. So yeah, generally. But
finally, we have something, just a complete head nod. You need to have that in your library. You need to have Stephen Crane available for a browser to find who's never found him before. And this thing, I'm assuming this book will have all of Red Badge of Courage and lots of other stuff in addition.
Good question. We do have the Red Badge of Courage on the shelf next to it. This, I think, is mostly short stories and sketches, though. I don't see. Let me check the table. Oh boy, there's a lot of. This is a beefy table of contents here, sir. I don't see any evidence of the Red Badge of Courage being in here, although there is something called The Cry of a Huckleberry Pudding. So a dim study of camping experiences. Oh, I like that. I'm see, that already intrigues me. So
actually, it's a very good thing that Red Badge of Courage is not in there, because Red Badge of Courage is one register of this author. He had lots of other registers. Good for patrons to find out about him.
Nice.
He's an evergreen author. Mm-hmm. He is very much writing for all time rather than just writing for Edna Ferber. Yeah. Great. Good to see it there.
Didn't he dabble a little bit in the supernatural in some of his stories too? Yeah, cool.
including lots and lots of protracted essay or short story length exercises in modern humor that work. They really do work. So,
well, so we don't come off as upper class twits here. Too late. I thought I'd grab a classic that's.
I don't think we're in any danger of that. What is that doing in your library?
That's gonna stick in your side all day long, isn't it?
Be there. I guarantee you, if I walked through your classic section, I would find 30 omissions.
Sure. Yeah.
Just
we need to talk about those too on some future show. I can just see Steve at his local Dunkin' up the road in about 2 hours telling the clerk, in Cedarburg they have a copy of Pied Piper. So, but let's look at this modern classic, I would say. And I've never read it. I've only seen the movie thousands of times.
I can't read it.
Jaws, Peter Benchley. It's an old library bound one. The original. Yes. Yes. This is the first edition. Here, this will probably be a little better. Look at that cute fish.
This is Peter Benchley's the original novel. You'll talk about getting a boost from a movie. This thing, it did not become immortal. No one teaches it in schools. No one teaches it in seminars of any kind.
Right.
So, but it does still have a robust readership. And I am in what I gather is the minority that considers it a very accomplished novel. I don't think it's a classic trashy animal attacks novel at all. I think there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah.
That is neatly excised from Spielberg's movie. But that's okay. Don't get me started. Don't get us started on movies. Spielberg's movie is absolute catnip to film bros. They love it of all things. They don't love the whole movie. They don't even love most of the movie. There's one moment in the movie that they love. A knife that is stuck into the wood of the gunnel of a ship, water flickering on the light flickering on the water behind it. That one moment, that's what they love.
It doesn't take much for them, does it?
The reason it doesn't take much for them is because they're yearning for a healthy relationship with their fathers. Never going to happen. But nevertheless, the book is very different from the movie in a lot of ways, and I think is really good. I think that a patron of the library that borrowed the book thinking, "Oh, I know what's going to happen here," would be pleasantly surprised.
Good to hear. No, I like that. That's great. Did Benchley write anything else that you would deem of value? Like,
He did. Yeah,
okay.
But good luck saying that. If you wrote Jaws, who cares what else you wrote?
Yeah.
I mean, he wrote some stinkers, some real stinkers. But he also wrote, some highly personal stuff. Some stuff that didn't have anything to do with marauding sea beasts.
Right.
Put yourself in his position, right? You're a working, jobbing author. You had a minor amount of success with the previous book to Jaws, but not really enough to pay the mortgage or put the kids through school or guarantee your future. Not really enough to do that. And then you write a book that becomes not only a hit, but then becomes a mega hit that makes you independently wealthy. Once adapted to the screen. Because I don't know if you ought to, those of you who are watching ought to look up a picture of the original cover art for Jaws. And then think of the Immortal movie poster. They are completely different. If that happens to you and you are just a writer, it's going to be you're going to consider it grossly irresponsible to just ignore that.
Right.
Go back to that well.
I used to think it'd be kind of amusing if Benchley himself was actually from Idaho and he hated the water. I mean,
well, he ended up hating Jaws, of course, as every author who writes a book like this does, but also atoning for it. He spent the rest of his life atoning for it because, oceanographic societies were telling him people are harvesting sharks now out of sheer hatred because they are endangered. The great white shark was an endangered species for a while because of this book. Right.
Absolutely.
So he had to give all sorts of speeches saying, humans do far more damage to sharks than sharks ever do to humans, et cetera, et cetera. But
there's a lesson there. I wonder if so what Benchley did to sharks, an author should do to politicians. It's just a thought. If you could write a book that makes them endangered.
It is a heartening reminder. It's a negative reminder but it's a heartening reminder that books can still have a huge impact.
Yeah.
Or at least could 50 years ago.
Absolutely.
Or, or The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. You think of a book that can have an impact.
Right. So to wrap it up here, I've got the ultimate classic, I guess. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, this is big. This is huge.
Wait for the siren.
Well, what I'm about to do will probably warrant sirens, actually. So I don't know if you can tell from the cover we have here. I grabbed the Dead Sea Scrolls.
But, okay, all right. What is this? What edition is this? Who did this? You can't just say the Dead Sea Scrolls. You have to.
Here we go. If you can see that, we have a selection of original manuscripts, translated and edited by Giza Vermes, I guess is the. It's the Folio Society year 2000 publication here. So.
Okay, but his translation is earlier than that, right?
Yes, translation 62 apparently.
Okay,
yeah, and 65 and 68 and 75. Yeah. So, but here it is, the original classic.
Well, and this edition for Folio Society has annotations, right?
It does indeed. Yes, absolutely, it does. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So there it is.
I mean, your patrons at the library, I think it's safe to say, are in huge proportion Christians.
Very much so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And their faith comes from within. Their faith is a wellspring that sheds light in their life. But their church is built on a book. Mm-hmm. It's built on a collection of texts. And since that's true, it's not built on an oral tradition of a great teacher. In other words, it's built on a book, series of books. Since that's the case, it should be incumbent on them to read about the Dead Sea Scrolls.
I want to see this moving, Cedarberg. Come on. We got to get some action.
Story. If I remember correctly, that edition has a long introduction.
Yes, it does. Yep.
It tells you all about the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and what's in them and what makes them significant.
Even some photographs, if you're so inclined.
Yes, is that the photo? The big photograph is the location where they were found.
Yep,
is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It was a chance discovery of one of the most significant literary archaeological discoveries of all time. It was done by chance.
Yeah,
and the introduction will make clear why these are so interesting, why they are so important for you to read. Because it's a long story that we don't have time to get into.
I like him in the original Hebrew myself, but that's just me.
You look back at this literary tradition that has had the heavy, heavy hand of the Christian church on its neck from its inception.
Yeah.
Not just shaping the tradition, but ruthlessly getting rid of any parts of it that they don't like.
Mm-hmm.
Whole bodies of literature that are gone completely.
Yeah.
Because the church had access to them and could get rid of them. And we know that those rival literatures were happening incredibly early in the history of Christianity.
Yeah.
Preserved in the Gospels are stories about rival branches of Christianity. They were already there, only 100 years later. They spawned lots of literary traditions of their own. So, of course, the question throughout the Middle Ages was, for some people who didn't voice it out loud because they didn't want to be burned in their public square, was, well, wouldn't it be great to find a body of literature that is ancient that was not under the hand of the church?
Mm-hmm.
What would that be like?
It would be like this, I hear.
And that's a lovely, sturdy edition.
It is.
That once upon a time, your public library was a site of learning. You would go there to learn something, and not just about nose warmers.
We do have something called the Library of Things, where you can check out, air fryers and sleds in the winter and nose warmers. But
also,
Dead Sea Scrolls.
If you have a radio show that you'd like produced, you can check out my producer.
No, that's true. Don't do it.
It's a lot closer to being true than I'd like.
Just make sure you return me in 2 weeks, in relatively decent shape. Okay. Oh my, yeah, this is exciting. When I found that, I'd forgotten we had this, and it's neat to see this again. And
This was the classics episode. This was the classics episode.
Oh, you want a traditional classic?
Not Bible, not Last of the Mohicans, not Huck Finn. Instead, The Pied Piper by Neville Shute. What is that even doing in your library?
Well, the ones you mentioned, everyone knows that nonsense.
Somewhere in the darkest pits of hell, Neville Shute just perked up. Wait, did you hear that? Somebody called Pied Piper a classic. And all the people around him are saying, yeah, but they said it in Wisconsin. And he's saying, well, what's wrong with Wisconsin? And they're saying, well, it's the home of serial killers. And he's saying, how do you know that? And they're saying, because we are those serial killers.
It's the home of this. We haven't seen her in a while.
Our queen has returned to save us. Thank God.
So there we are. We had two queens on the show today. We had our bratwurst queen and, of course, Frida. So that wildly successful. That's our classic show. We'll do another. Steve thought this would be a palate cleanser. I showed him. And we'll be back next week with some potential classics. We have
somehow with this show, my palate is always cluttered.
Well, you just gotta blast that stuff out of there, Steve. Come on, you get some dental floss, whatever it takes. All right. It's been Books of the Week, and of course, the most wonderful thing that you can do for not us, but for the friends of the Cedarburg Public Library is go to patreon.com/Books of the Week. What do the cool kids say? Like, share, subscribe.
Yeah. Because after this half hour, the first thing that comes to your mind is, hey, I want to give them money.
If I give them enough, maybe there's a consolation prize.
We ought to say, if you contribute enough to the Friends Patreon, we'll stop the show.
On game shows, they used to give you turtle wax for a parting gift. I want to give you Pied Piper. So there we go. But friends,
one of you patrons has to go and check out Pied Piper.
Don't you dare. You just stay right in your home where you belong. And of course, we would like to thank the friends, because without them, what are we? Oh, sir.
One of the friends routinely shows up to meetings in a nose warmer. We haven't wanted to talk about it. No one's wanted to point it out.
How do we bring that up?
I don't know. I don't have any idea.
Is that a nose warmer, or are you happy to see me? Hey, there we go. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Have a great weekend, a great reading week. Thank you, Steve. We'll see you again. Bye-bye.